The unexpected encounter. Hook. It was a typical Thursday evening for David. He had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to getting home, grabbing a quick dinner, and unwinding with a good book. But as he drove along the quiet road leading to his neighborhood, something unusual caught his eye. A car was pulled over on the side of the road. The hazard lights blinked erratically, and the car's front tire was visibly flat. David couldn't help but notice that the driver, a woman, was pacing nervously beside her vehicle. She looked frustrated, possibly even scared. David glanced at his rearview mirror. There were no other cars around, and it was already getting dark. He knew the area well, and the stretch of road was known for being isolated. Should I stop? David thought to himself, his foot hovering over the brake. He wasn't in a rush, but he wasn't exactly in the mood for an interruption either. Still, there was something about the situation that made him hesitate. After a few seconds, his decision was made. David pulled over to the side of the road and parked behind the woman's car. He stepped out of his car, locking it behind him, and walked toward the woman, who had her hands on her hips, looking around, clearly unsure of what to do next. "Hey, are you all right?" David called out. The woman turned toward him, startled, but her face quickly softened when she saw him approach. "Oh, thank God. I wasn't sure who else to ask. I've tried calling a tow truck, but they said it could be an hour before they get here," she explained, her voice tinged with anxiety. "I don't know anything about cars, and I'm really stuck." David smiled warmly, trying to reassure her. "No problem. I can help. Let me take a look." The woman hesitated for a moment, as though unsure whether to trust him, but then nodded. "You would do that? That's so kind of you. I really appreciate it." David crouched beside the car to inspect the flat tire. It was obvious that it wasn't just low, it was completely deflated. He could see the damage right away. The tire had been punctured, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple air refill. It would need to be replaced. As he looked around for the spare tire in the trunk, he noticed the woman standing a little farther back, wringing her hands. She seemed nervous, glancing down the road every few seconds, as if expecting someone to appear. "I don't mean to be a bother, but are you sure you have time for this?" she asked again, her voice shaky. David looked up at her and smiled. "It'll only take a few minutes. You're not bothering me at all." He felt a sense of ease as he worked. Despite the woman's nervousness, David was calm. He had helped change tires many times before, both for strangers and friends. His hands moved efficiently, pulling out the jack and spare tire from the trunk, and soon the damaged tire was off, and the new one was securely in place. As he tightened the last bolt, the woman walked up to him and watched, clearly grateful. "You really saved me today. I don't know what I would have done without your help. I'd still be stuck out here waiting for a tow truck, most likely." David gave her a friendly smile, finishing up the tire change. "No big deal. It's just a flat tire. Happened to me once, so I know the feeling." When David finished, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "There you go, all set," he said, stepping back so she could take a look. She glanced at the tire, then back at David, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much this means to me." David shrugged, feeling a little uncomfortable with all the praise. "It's nothing, really. I'm just glad I could help." The woman hesitated for a moment, as though she was deciding whether to say something else. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I know I don't really know you, but you've been so kind. I feel like I should offer you something, anything. I can't just let you help and not return the favor." David shook his head, already starting to walk back toward his car. "I'm just glad you're safe and good to go. No need for anything in return." The woman watched him, still standing next to her car. "Are you sure?" she asked, a bit of hesitation in her voice. "Maybe I could buy you dinner sometime, or at least give you my number, in case you need anything." David chuckled softly. I appreciate it, but honestly, just take care of yourself and get home safely. That's all I need." The woman seemed satisfied with his answer, although David could see a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. She seemed like someone who didn't often accept kindness without feeling the need to return it. As David turned to leave, he caught one last glimpse of her. She was standing there, looking after him with an unreadable expression. For some reason, he felt like there was something more to this woman, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But he shook the feeling off, telling himself that he was just overthinking it. With a final wave, David got into his car and drove off, not realizing that this seemingly simple act of kindness would set off a series of events that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. As he drove down the darkening road, David couldn't help but feel uneasy. He tried to push it away, telling himself that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But the truth was, something about the encounter, something about that woman, had left an impression on him, and in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. A strange feeling, building suspense. The next morning, David tried to put the events from the night before out of his mind. He woke up to the usual hum of the city, cars driving by, people going about their business, and the distant sounds of his neighbors waking up for the day. His routine was comforting. Yet, as he sat down with his coffee, something nagged at the back of his mind. He couldn't shake the memory of the woman from yesterday, the way she had looked at him when he was leaving. There was something in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and something else. It wasn't just her kindness that bothered him. It was the feeling that something was off about the entire encounter. The way she seemed too eager to offer something in return. Why would a stranger feel the need to give so much, especially when it was only a simple act of kindness? David tried to brush off the feeling. After all, he had helped someone in need. He couldn't have known anything strange would come out of it. Maybe it was just his imagination. Still, that unease lingered as he got ready for work. As the day wore on, he tried to focus on his tasks. He went to meetings, answered emails, and even ran some errands. Yet, throughout the day, his thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter with the woman. He thought about her face, her voice, the way she stood so still, almost like she was waiting for something. But waiting for what? And why had she seemed so desperate to repay him? Later in the afternoon, David left the office early, feeling a bit distracted and drained. He was tired, and the events from yesterday were beginning to feel like a fog in his mind. The commute home was quiet, and the traffic was lighter than usual. As he approached his street, a familiar sight caught his eye. Across from his house, a sleek black SUV was parked in the same spot where it had been the night before. David's heart skipped a beat. He had dismissed it as a coincidence earlier, but now that he saw it again, the feeling of unease returned in full force. The SUV hadn't been there the day before, at least, not when he left for work. But now it sat quietly across the street, parked under a street lamp. There was no one around. David slowed down as he passed the vehicle, his eyes darting to the tinted windows. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement inside the car, a faint silhouette shifting, but it was too quick to be sure. His stomach tightened, and his mind raced. What were the chances of a black SUV just appearing 2 days in a row at the exact same time? What was going on? He pulled into his driveway and parked his car, trying to ignore the growing anxiety creeping up his spine. He told himself he was overthinking. It was just a coincidence. But deep down, he felt a strange pull to figure out what was happening. What connection did the SUV have to the woman? Was this some kind of strange mistake, or was he being watched? David tried to push the thoughts away as he entered his house. He changed into comfortable clothes and went about his evening routine, but he couldn't help stealing glances out the window every now and then. The SUV remained parked across the street, unmoving. After dinner, David decided he needed to get some fresh air to clear his head. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, taking a slow walk down the street. As he walked past the SUV, His pulse quickened. The vehicle looked ordinary from the outside, but there was something menacing about it in the darkness. Why was it just sitting there? Who was inside? And why did he feel as if someone was watching him? He continued walking, trying not to glance over at the SUV again. But as he turned the corner at the end of his block, a sharp sound broke through the stillness of the night. The sound of a car door opening. David's heart skipped. He turned instinctively, his breath catching in his throat. The SUV's headlights flashed briefly, and the vehicle began to roll forward, slowly. He couldn't see who was driving it or who was inside, but the car moved with purpose, following his every step. His mind raced as his feet carried him faster down the street. He didn't want to look behind him, but his instincts told him he was being followed. Suddenly, the SUV sped up, pulling up beside him. David froze as the window rolled down, revealing the face of a man. The man wore dark sunglasses, even though it was well past sunset, and his expression was unreadable. "Hey," the man said, his voice low but steady. "You're David, right? The guy who helped the woman with the flat tire." David's stomach dropped. He had been expecting this moment, but had no idea what to say. He was caught off guard and stood there, momentarily speechless. How did this man know his name? And what did he want? The man leaned out of the window just enough to make eye contact. "I need to talk to you. It's about the woman you helped. You've gotten yourself involved in something much bigger than you realize." David's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his head, but he couldn't make sense of it all. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his best effort to stay calm. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply stared at David for a long, tense moment. Then, with a quick nod, he said, "Come with me if you want to understand everything. This is bigger than just a flat tire." Before David could react, the SUV's engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving David standing there in complete confusion. The mysterious visitor. David stood frozen for a moment, the sound of the SUV's engine fading into the distance. His heart was pounding in his chest, and a wave of confusion and fear washed over him. Who was that man? What did he mean when he said, "It's bigger than just a flat tire"? He didn't know what to make of it all. Everything that had seemed so ordinary just a day ago was now shrouded in mystery. His legs felt heavy as he turned around and walked back to his house. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but he didn't know what to do next. The man's words echoed in his mind. "Come with me if you want to understand everything." But what if this was a mistake? What if it was just some kind of scam or a prank? But deep down, David knew this wasn't a joke. The events of the past 2 days were too strange to be dismissed. The woman, the black SUV, and now this mysterious man who seemed to know so much about him. Everything was connected in a way David couldn't explain. David paced around his living room, running his hands through his hair. He couldn't just ignore it. The curiosity gnawed at him. He needed answers, and for some reason, he couldn't let it go. The feeling of unease, that constant feeling that he was being watched, had started to grow stronger. He glanced out of the window once more. The SUV was gone, but the unsettling feeling remained. Was it watching him, even from a distance, or was it just his mind playing tricks on him? David sat down, trying to calm his racing thoughts, but as the night wore on, he couldn't stop thinking about the man and the words he had said. He didn't know who these people were, but David couldn't help but feel like he had just become a pawn in something much larger than he had ever imagined. After all, it all started with a simple act of kindness, changing a flat tire. Now, somehow, his life was intertwined with strangers, with secrets, and with something that had already started to pull him deeper than he ever thought possible. It was nearly midnight when David's phone rang. He looked at the screen, his stomach dropping when he saw an unknown number. A surge of fear gripped him. Should he answer? Was it the man from the SUV? With a shaky hand, He picked up the phone. "Hello." There was a brief silence on the other end before a voice, cold and deliberate, spoke. "David, I know you're confused. You're not the only one who's been pulled into this, but you need to listen carefully. You've got to come with us. We don't have much time." The voice didn't sound threatening, but it was urgent, like someone who knew something David didn't. David's heart raced. "Who is this? Who are you?" he demanded, trying to steady his voice. "Someone who knows what's coming. Someone who knows what you've gotten yourself involved in. If you want to stay safe, you need to trust me." David swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. "Trust you? I don't even know who you are." There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end spoke again. "Listen, the woman you helped, Emily, she's in danger. And so are you. You're already part of something bigger than you realize. You can't walk away from it now." David's mind was spinning. Emily. That was the woman from the flat tire. How could she be in danger? And why was he part of it? None of this made sense. "I don't understand," David said, feeling a sense of helplessness creep over him. "Don't worry, David. You will. But right now, you need to come to us. If you don't, you might not get another chance. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The line went dead before David could say anything else. He was left standing there, staring at his phone in disbelief. His thoughts were racing. Who was Emily? Why was she in danger? And why was he involved? The call didn't sit well with him. The voice was calm, but there was a sense of urgency that suggested things were far more dangerous than David could imagine. He couldn't sit around waiting for answers to come to him. He had to act. He needed to find out more, to figure out what was going on. David grabbed his coat and keys, his mind made up. He had no idea what he was walking into, but there was no turning back now. He couldn't pretend that this was all just some weird coincidence. Too much had happened, too many strange occurrences for him to ignore, and somehow Emily was at the center of it all. He stepped outside, the cold night air hitting his face as he made his way to his car. As he started the engine, his mind raced with questions. What would he find if he followed these mysterious people? Were they really trying to help him, or was he walking straight into a trap? David drove through the quiet streets, following the directions the voice on the phone had given him. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the location, a small, secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building looked abandoned, with no lights on and no signs of life. It sent a chill through his spine. David parked his car a few yards away, watching the dark silhouette of the building. He was close, so close to uncovering the truth. But as he stepped out of his car, he felt that same sense of dread creeping back. Whatever was waiting for him inside that building, he wasn't ready for it. But there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, he walked toward the door, not knowing what awaited him, but feeling as though he was about to step into something much bigger than he could handle, something he would never be able to walk away from, into the unknown. David's heart raced as he stood outside the warehouse, the heavy weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He stared at the dimly lit building in front of him, trying to calm his nerves. The streets around him were empty and quiet, as if the world had gone still. He looked at his watch, almost midnight. What was he doing here? He had no idea what kind of danger he was walking into, or who these people really were. But one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it had already changed his life. Taking a deep breath, David forced himself to walk forward. The gravel crunched under his boots as he approached the large steel door. There were no lights in the area, no sound except for the beating of his heart in his chest. He reached the door and hesitated for a moment. Was he doing the right thing? The voice on the phone had been clear. It said he needed to come here if he wanted answers. But the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was he walking into a trap? Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open slightly, as if someone had been waiting for him. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A tall man in a dark jacket, his face shadowed by the dim light, but his presence commanding. The man didn't speak at first, just gave David a brief, unreadable look. It was as if he were sizing him up. "You made the right choice," the man said finally, his voice low and calm. "Come inside. There's much to explain." David didn't know what to think, but the man's words seemed to push him forward. Maybe this was the only way he would find the answers he was looking for. After a brief pause, he nodded and stepped inside. The warehouse was surprisingly clean inside, though it was clearly an old building. The floors were concrete, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with boxes and crates. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. There were a few dim lights hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the room. The space was sparse, but it didn't feel empty. There was a sense of purpose in the air, as if everything here was part of something bigger, something David couldn't yet understand. As he entered further, David noticed two other figures standing by the far wall. A woman and a man, both dressed in dark clothing, watching him silently. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes held something calculating, almost as if they were waiting for him to prove himself worthy of their trust. The woman, who had short dark hair, gave him a quick, sharp glance before turning away, while the man, a tall, muscular figure, looked at him with a neutral expression. Neither of them spoke. David's gaze shifted back to the man who had opened the door. The stranger stepped forward, motioning for David to follow him. "Emily is already inside," he said quietly. "She's waiting for you." The mention of Emily made David's heart skip a beat. She was the reason he was here, the reason everything had spiraled out of control. He had to know what was going on. Why had she been so desperate to repay him for something as simple as helping her change a tire? Why had she seemed so nervous? And most importantly, why had a black SUV been parked outside his house? The man led David down a narrow hallway to a door at the back of the warehouse. The moment they stepped inside, David's eyes were drawn to a small group gathered around a table. Emily was sitting at the head of it, her face tense, as if she had been waiting for him. She looked up at David, and for the first time since he'd met her, her expression was serious, not grateful, but almost relieved. "David," she said, standing up, "I'm glad you came. We didn't have much time." David's mind was racing. He took a step toward her, but the man from earlier stopped him with a firm gesture. "You need to understand something first," the man said. "This is bigger than just a flat tire. Emily, and now you, are involved in something much more dangerous than you realize. You've been caught up in a game between two groups, a game that could cost you your life." David blinked, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Who are these people? What game?" The woman standing near the wall, the one who had been watching him when he entered, finally spoke, her voice sharp. "We are a part of a group that's been monitoring certain individuals for a long time. People who can make a difference, whether they know it or not. You're one of those people, David. That's why you helped Emily. That's why you were in the right place at the right time." David's head was spinning. He wanted to ask more questions, but he couldn't keep up with what was being said. He looked at Emily for some kind of explanation, but she was silent now, her hands folded in her lap. The man who had opened the door stepped forward again, his face hardening. "You need to understand, there are two sides to this conflict. One side is looking to control a powerful force. The other side, the side we're on, is trying to stop them. We need your help, David, and we need Emily's too." David's mind was racing. Help with what? He had no idea what was going on, but it was clear now that he had been pulled into something much larger than he ever anticipated. He had thought that changing a flat tire was just an act of kindness, but now he was starting to realize that it had been the beginning of something far more dangerous. "What kind of help?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man gave a brief nod toward Emily. "Emily will explain. But first, you have to know this. You're in danger now, whether you want to be or not. There's no going back." David felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time, he realized just how deep this had all gone. He had been drawn into a web of mystery, and he had no idea where it was going to lead. But one thing was clear: his life would never be the same. Secrets unveiled. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sound being the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. David stood at the table, his thoughts swirling. He had been hoping for answers, but now that they were on the table, they only raised more questions. Emily was sitting across from him, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. The man who had greeted him at the door, along with the other two figures in the room, were watching him closely, waiting for him to process everything. David's heart was still pounding, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had helped a woman with a flat tire, and now, less than 48 hours later, he was sitting in a dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by strangers who were telling him that his life had just become part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The man who had spoken earlier, the one who had seemed the most serious, leaned forward slightly. "David, you don't understand yet, but you're part of a much bigger picture. What happened yesterday wasn't just a coincidence. You didn't help Emily by chance." David blinked, trying to make sense of the words. "What do you mean?" "I just helped her with a tire. It wasn't anything special." The woman who had been quiet until now, her sharp eyes constantly observing, finally spoke up. "It wasn't just the tire. It was the timing. Emily was being washed. She needed someone to help her, and you were the person who came along. That's not by accident. People like you, people who can be in the right place at the right time, are rare." David felt his head spin. "Why me?" He could barely get the words out. "What's so special about me?" The man who had spoken earlier sighed deeply. "It's not just about you, David. It's about what you represent. The people who are watching Emily have been monitoring her for months. She's been involved in something bigger than either of us want to admit. But we can't do this alone. We need people like you, David. People who can help us expose the truth." David leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "I still don't understand. What is all this about? Who's trying to hurt Emily? And why do you think I can help?" Emily's voice interrupted, soft but steady. "David, I didn't want to get you involved. But now that you are, you need to know. What I'm about to tell you will change everything. There's a powerful organization, one with resources, influence, and control over everything you see around you. They've been working in the shadows for years. They want something that could change the world, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." David's mind raced as she spoke. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. "What is it they want?" he asked. "What is so important that people are willing to hurt others for it?" Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering briefly to the man at the head of the table before speaking again. "They want control. Control over information, over people, over entire systems. And they'll stop at nothing to achieve it. You have to understand, David, this isn't just about some shady deal or corporate greed. This is bigger. This is about reshaping the world. And anyone who gets in their way becomes a target." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of her words sank in. David sat still, unable to process everything. It all sounded like something out of a thriller novel, but he knew deep down that there was no denying the seriousness of the situation. He had been thrust into something dangerous, something beyond his understanding, and there was no going back now. "Okay," David said, finally breaking the silence. "But what do you need me for? I'm just a guy who helped you change a tire. What could I possibly do to stop something like this?" The man at the table, the one who had been speaking the most, stood up and walked toward him. His face was calm, but there was a determination in his eyes. "David, you're not just anyone. You were chosen for a reason. You have access to things, to people, that we can't get to. You have connections, influence. And right now, that's exactly what we need. There's a plan, a way to expose the organization, but we can't do it without your help. You have to be willing to take a risk, one that could change everything. David's breath caught in his throat. I don't know if I can. I don't know what I'm walking into. Emily looked at him, her expression softening for the first time since he'd arrived. I know it's overwhelming, but you can't turn back now. The moment you helped me, your life became part of this story. Whether you like it or not, you're already in it. You can't just walk away. David closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the gravity of the situation. This was no longer just about a good deed. This was about survival, about fighting against something far larger and more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. His life, his future. It was all on the line. You'll have to make a choice, the man said, his voice steady. Help us, and we can take down this organization. But it won't be easy. There will be risks. There will be danger. But if you don't, you'll become a target. You'll become part of the system they want to control. David stared at the man, his mind racing. The decision was clear, but it was terrifying. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to fight something so powerful. But one thing was certain, his life was never going to be the same again. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with unknowns. But somehow, David knew that he had already made his choice. I'll help, he said, his voice firm, but tinged with uncertainty. But I need to know everything. I need to understand what I'm up against. The man nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing his face. We'll explain everything. But first, we need to act quickly. Time is running out. David's decision had been made. He had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Whatever came next, he was in it for the long haul. And as the door to the warehouse closed behind him, he knew that his life would never be the same again. What he had walked into was bigger than any of them could have imagined, and the battle for control of the future had just begun. The first move. The tension in the room was palpable. David felt the weight of the decision he had just made pressing down on him. He had agreed to help, but he had no idea what he was about to get into. The man who had been briefing him stepped forward, his expression now more serious than ever. Good, the man said, his voice low. We didn't expect it to be easy, but you've made the right choice. Now, there's no time to waste. We need to move fast. The organization we're up against doesn't wait. David swallowed hard. The reality of the situation was setting in. This was no longer about some simple favor or an unexpected act of kindness. This was war, silent, dangerous, and full of unknowns. The man motioned for David to follow him as he led him toward a side door. We've prepared a plan, but it requires careful timing. We're not the only ones aware of what's happening. The people we're up against, they've got eyes everywhere, so we need to stay one step ahead. David's heart pounded in his chest. The mention of eyes everywhere sent a chill down his spine. He had no idea what kind of enemies he was up against, but one thing was clear. They were powerful, and they weren't afraid to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. As the man opened the door, they stepped into a smaller, more secure room. Inside, there were several monitors on a table, along with a few computers. A few people were gathered around, typing rapidly and discussing in low voices. The atmosphere was intense. Everyone seemed to know their role, their place in this larger, hidden operation. We've been tracking the organization's movements for months, the man explained as David took in the scene. We know who's involved, where they operate, and how they move, but we still don't know why they're after Emily specifically. That's where you come in. David's mind raced as he processed the words. You want me to find out why they're targeting her? Yes, the man said, nodding. But we also need to disrupt their operations. Every minute counts. We need to get the information we need and stay ahead of them. That's the only way we can stop them before they get too far. David was trying to keep up with the gravity of the situation, but he felt out of his depth. What had started as a simple act of kindness had quickly spiraled into something much bigger. He was now part of a covered operation, and the stakes were incredibly high. "How do we even begin?" David asked, his voice steady, but the uncertainty was still there. "Where do we start?" The woman who had been silent up until now spoke up. "We have intel on a facility. It's one of the organization's main hubs. If we can infiltrate it, we might be able to find something crucial, something that could explain why Emily is involved and how we can stop them." The word infiltrate made David's stomach flip. He wasn't a spy or a trained operative. He was just a guy who had helped a woman change her tire. But he realized there was no turning back now. He had already made the choice to be part of this, and there was no way out without risking his life. The man with the plan turned to the group. "We've mapped out the location. We'll need to move quickly and silently. David, you'll be our eyes on the ground. We need someone who can blend in. You've got connections. You've got access. This is your moment." David could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just about helping anymore. It wasn't even about answering the questions swirling in his mind. This was about taking action, about being part of something that could change everything. The woman turned to David. "There's more you need to know. The organization isn't just a criminal syndicate. It's much more intricate. There are levels within levels, each more dangerous than the last. If you're going to survive this, you need to understand that everyone has their role. And now, you have yours." David nodded, trying to digest the information. The organization they were up against wasn't just a group of criminals. It was a shadow network that had infiltrated systems far beyond what he could imagine. The weight of the situation was starting to hit him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. "You need to move fast," the man continued. "This mission will be risky. There's no guarantee we'll get out unscathed. But if we don't act now, they'll have full control, and there'll be no stopping them." David looked at Emily, who was standing silently in the corner, watching him. Her eyes were filled with a mix of hope and fear, but she didn't say anything. She had already warned him that this was dangerous. But now it was clear, this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them, about stopping a network that could change everything, forever. "I understand," David said, his voice firm, even though his hands were sweating. "Let's do it. Let's find out what they're hiding." The man gave him a nod of approval. "Good. We'll go over the details, but we don't have much time. The clock is ticking." As the team prepared for the mission, David felt his stomach turn. He had no idea what he was walking into. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. He was no longer just a guy helping a stranger. He was now part of something far bigger, something that could change the course of everything. The night was growing darker, and time was running out. David could only hope that he had made the right choice, because there was no turning back. The final confrontation. The atmosphere in the room was charged with an electric intensity as the team gathered around, preparing for the most dangerous part of the mission. The lights in the warehouse flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. David could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. His hands were clammy, his thoughts racing. "This is it," the man in charge said, his voice low and steady. "We've come this far, but now we're going to need everything we've got. The facility isn't just a building. It's the heart of the operation. If we can get in, we might find something that can bring this entire organization down. But be warned," he added, looking directly at David. "This is where things get dangerous." David swallowed hard, the reality of what they were about to do sinking in. He wasn't a trained operative. He didn't have the experience, the tools, or the skills to go up against what they were about to face. But there was no turning back. He had already chosen this path. The moment he had helped Emily, his life had changed. And now it was about to change again. The team briefed him one last time. They would approach the facility under the cover of night, using a series of divergent tactics to draw attention away from their main objective: infiltrating the building. The facility wasn't just guarded. It was locked down tight, surrounded by surveillance, high fences, and armed security. But they had a plan. A dangerous one, but a plan nonetheless. Emily was with them, but her role was different now. She wasn't just an innocent bystander anymore. She had become a key player in all of this, and her knowledge of the organization would be crucial in getting them inside. But David knew that Emily was scared. She had been through so much already, and this mission was as much a risk for her as it was for him. "Are you sure about this?" David asked her, his voice barely above a whisper as they stood in the shadows of the warehouse, preparing to move out. "You don't have to do this. You've already risked so much." Emily gave him a sad smile, her eyes tired but determined. "There's no going back, David. They've already marked me. I've been a part of this for too long to turn away now." He nodded, understanding that the stakes were higher than ever. They were both in this now, too deep to escape, even if they wanted to. And for the first time, David truly understood what he had gotten himself into. This was no longer a matter of helping someone out of kindness. This was about survival, about taking down a powerful enemy that would stop at nothing to maintain control. The team moved out, slipping through the night like shadows. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. The plan was risky, but they had no choice but to push forward. They had to get into that facility and uncover the truth. As they approached the outskirts of the facility, the sound of footsteps grew fainter, drowned out by the hum of the distant security lights and the buzz of surveillance cameras. David's heart raced, every muscle in his body tense. They were almost there. "This is it," the man in charge whispered. "Stay close, follow the plan, and don't make a sound." David felt the weight of the night pressing on him as they slipped closer to the fence. He could hear the distant voices of guards, the low murmur of the facility's operations. The closer they got, the more his mind raced. Was this really the right thing to do? Could they pull this off? Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the night air. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. Had they been caught? He turned to look at the others, but no one seemed alarmed. Emily motioned for him to stay still, her expression alert but calm. The sound had come from the other side of the fence. The guards must have been distracted by the diversion. They had a few more seconds. The team moved quickly now, cutting through the perimeter and scaling the fence with impressive speed. David's hands were shaking as he pulled himself up, his body aching from the exertion. He could hear his heart pounding in his chest as they landed on the other side, crouching low to avoid detection. Once inside the facility, they split up. The plan was simple: get to the central hub of the building, find the main computer system, and access the data that would expose the organization's operations. But as they crept through the dark corridors, the feeling of danger became palpable. The air was thick with tension, and every corner they turned felt like it could be their last. David was leading the way now, his instincts guiding him through the maze of hallways. He had no idea what they were up against, but he knew one thing for sure: they couldn't afford to fail. They'd reached the central control room, and David felt a surge of hope. They were so close now. The man in charge motioned for him to take the lead. He reached for the door handle, his heart racing. But as his fingers brushed the cold metal, a loud alarm suddenly blared to life, echoing through the building. David's heart skipped a beat. They had been discovered. "Move!" the man in charge shouted. "Go, go, go!" Panic surged through David's veins as they raced through the facility. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, the guards closing in. They had to get out now. But just as they reached the exit, they were met by armed guards. There was no way out. David's mind raced as he looked for an escape route, but there was none. The team was trapped. "We're out of time," Emily said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We can't fight our way out of here. You need to go. You have to finish this for all of us." David looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of their failure. They had come so close. But now, the only choice was to survive. The team split up, scattering in different directions to create a diversion. David knew what he had to do. He couldn't stay and fight. It would be suicide. But he also couldn't leave without finishing what they had started. As he sprinted through the corridors, his mind raced. He had one final move to make, one last chance to take down the organization. But as he reached the end of the hall, something caught his eye. The security footage on a monitor showed a familiar face, one that he hadn't expected to see again. The mystery was deepening, and the truth was far darker than he could ever have imagined.